Hello Gators, it's Miss McConnell and I'm here to read you our first biography for Breakfast and Biographies. Today's book is about Martin Luther King Jr., civil rights leader. This book is written by M.C. Hall and it's illustrated by Marty Martinez. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia, on January 15th, 1929. Martin's father was a minister at an African-American church, and his mother had been a teacher. Martin grew up listening to his father speak at church. He became a good speaker himself. He even won prizes for speeches he gave at school. Martin was born in 1929. In 1929, segregation was everywhere in the South. Segregation laws kept African Americans and whites apart. African American children couldn't go to school with white children. African Americans and whites couldn't drink from the same drinking fountains. They couldn't eat at the same restaurants. Martin's parents taught him that the color of a person's skin didn't matter. However, Martin knew it did matter to some people. When he was 6, he became friends with a white boy. Then the boy's father said his son couldn't play with African American children. This picture shows a sign in a restaurant window that told African Americans that they are not allowed to eat there. When he was a teenager, Martin took a summer job on a farm in the North. He saw African Americans and whites working together. They went to the same churches. They shopped at the same stores. Martin wanted life to be like that in the South, too. In the North, Martin sat next to a white woman at church. When he was 15, Martin started college at a school for African American students. He thought about becoming a doctor or lawyer. Then he decided to be a minister like his father. He wanted to help African Americans. He wanted segregation to end. To become a minister, Martin Luther King Jr. needed more school. He went to another college where most of the students were white. King became a class leader anyway. While he was still in school, he met Coretta Scott. They got married in 1953. Martin and Coretta King had 4 children. Their names were Yolanda, Dexter, Martin, and Bernice. Martin and Coretta Scott were married. After college, King decided to become a minister in Montgomery, Alabama. In Montgomery, the bus had unfair rules. African American passengers had to ride in the back of the bus. If a bus was full, they had to give their seats to white passengers. One afternoon, a woman named Rosa Parks got on the bus. She was tired after a long day of work. She wouldn't give her seat to a white passenger. The bus driver called the police, and they took Rosa Parks to jail. In jail, a police officer took Rosa Parks' fingerprints. African Americans were angry, and King led a boycott against the bus company. He asked all African Americans to stay off the buses until the rules changed. The boycott made some whites angry. They sent letters saying they would hurt King and his family. Some even threw a bomb at his house. However, King refused to fight back. King didn't believe in violence. He said, "We must meet hate with love." King led many civil rights protests. It took more than a year for the boycott to work. The U.S. Supreme Court finally said the bus company's rules were unfair. The company could not make African Americans move to the back of the bus. It could not make them give up their seats to whites. King was happy that his peaceful protest had worked. He wanted to work harder against segregation. He led protests against other unfair laws. He told his people not to fight if they were arrested. After the boycott, African Americans were free to sit anywhere on the bus. King and his followers had to be brave. People threw stones and dirt at them. The police sometimes sprayed them with fire hoses. Many of them were sent to jail. King ended up in jail too. One time, King sent a letter from jail. The letter became famous. He wrote about his ideas about ending segregation. He reminded his followers to protest peacefully. Police sometimes sprayed King and his fellow protesters with fire hoses. Many people listened to King. African Americans and whites rode together in buses across the country. They called their trips Freedom Rides. Freedom Riders led marches in the cities they traveled to. They carried signs that said segregation should end. Protesters climb aboard a bus for a freedom ride. In August 1963, more than 200,000 marchers went to Washington, D.C. King made a speech there. He said, "I have a dream." His dream was that his children would not be judged by the color of their skin. More and more people started to listen to King and other African American leaders. In 1964, a new law passed. The Civil Rights Act said all people have the same rights. The color of a person's skin didn't matter. King's work made him famous around the world. In 1964, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. This prize is one of the most respected awards in the world. King gave his famous I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. King knew there was a lot of work still to do. Some states tried to make it hard for African Americans to vote. King led a protest and went to jail again. Some whites said they would kill him. Even some African Americans were angry at King. They said peaceful protests weren't enough. They wanted to use violence to change things. King did not believe in using violence for any reason. As a result, he thought war was very wrong. He made speeches asking for an end to a war the United States was fighting in the 1960s. King went to jail for his beliefs. But King wouldn't give up his peaceful protests. He went to Memphis, Tennessee to lead a march. This protest was to help workers who were being treated unfairly. The evening of April 4th, 1968, King was at his motel. He stood outside talking to friends. Then there was the sound of a gun. A white man named James Earl Ray shot and killed King. More than 100,000 people went to King's funeral. They wanted to honor him for his bravery. They wanted to thank him for his work. A carriage pulled King's coffin during his funeral. Now, there is a special day for remembering and honoring King. Every year, we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day on the third Monday of January. Every year, people march in a parade to honor Martin Luther King Jr. At the back of the book, we have some facts. We also have a timeline and a glossary. The fun facts: the Montgomery bus boycott worked because most of the people who rode the buses back then were black. Without black riders, the bus company couldn't make money. At age 35, King was the youngest person ever to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. The prize came with more than $50,000. King did not keep any of the money for himself. He gave it away to help his cause. King gave a speech just before he died. He knew that there were many threats against his life, but he was not afraid to die. He said, "I'm so happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man." Here's the timeline for Martin Luther King Jr. He was born on January 15th, 1929. In 1953, King married Coretta Scott. 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested on a bus for not giving up her seat to a white passenger. King led a successful boycott against the bus company. 1963, King gave his I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. In 1968, King was shot and killed on April 4th. In 1983, Martin Luther King Jr. Day becomes a national holiday. Then in the glossary, we have some words. The first word is boycott. It is to refuse to deal with a person, store, or organization until they agree to certain terms. The Civil Rights Act. It's an act passed in 1964 that made discrimination based on race, religion, or national origin unlawful. A minister. A person who leads church services. Protest. To speak out or act against something. segregation, the separation of an individual or group from a larger group. The U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the United States. The Supreme Court makes decisions about laws and how they are followed. And violence, fighting to physically hurt people. There's more you can learn at the library, on the web, and there's an index at the back of the book. Thank you so much, Gators, for joining me this morning for our Breakfast Biographies. I can't wait to explore all the exciting biographies we have for Black History Month here in February. See you tomorrow.